first of all, let's just take a moment to absorb what a former president and would-be president, again, is suggesting here, explicitly, publicly. Presidents who cross the line should get total immunity. I wonder what you think of these missives and how indicative they are of intention.
Intention, but also intention of how he would rule. I mean, I don't think there's really a question about how he would view presidential power if he were to come back. And I think it took him a long time, basically up until the last few months of his administration, to really figure out how to do it. But I think by the end, he had it figured out, and he had gotten rid of all of the John Kellys and Don McGahns and, you know, folks who were standing in his way. So he comes at it with telling everyone exactly what he wants to do, but also knowing how to do it. He didn't know how to do this, like, at first. And if you look at his moves in the first few years, he wasn't nearly as successful as he was in that final part where he put all of his time, energy, and power behind it.
Well, and I would argue also, Michael, he wasn't as, I mean, he's always been mad at the deep state. But given sort of he's been taken to the cleaners in terms of criminal liability, 91 felony counts. His rage is unbound in a way. It is directed at the system of justice in a way that it wasn't. I mean, he was always mad generally at the bureaucracy, but it is focused like a laser on those who would hold him accountable in a way that it wasn't when he was president. And I think, and I don't know what you think, that is terrifying for a potential second Trump term.
No, the focus is different. I mean, I'm sure if you listen to his speeches, there's stuff about the wall and all the other things. But when he ran in 2016, there was like a broader message that he used to appeal to his folks. And it wasn't running on vengeance. And the thing that I wonder, you know, with your political hats on is that, is vengeance something that really appeals to voters?
Well, I can tell you definitively yes, based on his, you know, where he is right now in terms of the Republican nomination. But listen, the number of Republican senators, and I focus on senators specifically because the Senate is so critical in all these arguments about immunity, for example, right? Does President Trump need to be convicted in the Senate first for his activities in and around January 6th, the insurrection, before he can face criminal liability? That's what Team Trump is now arguing. And then you see a letter like that, and it suggests to you the Senate's not going to do anything about January 6th ever. We didn't think it was, but holding Trump to account seems like a pipe dream.
Well, so Mike's point is a really good one. When Donald Trump started in 2016, it was about trying to work within a still kind of norm-bound understanding of government. But as he proceeded over the course of those 4 years, those norms really eroded and there weren't any checks. And now he's completely unbound. I do think that his base understands his vengeance, but vengeance is really just a more accelerated form of grievance, which he's always been peddling. So it's very familiar in that way. And, you know, there are no norms left. He's eroded all of these checks. Like, impeachment is a toothless paper tiger. The press, he is disregarded and discredited.
And targets explicitly in these missives.
And as you say, the Senate is not going to be a check either. Like, he has Congress in his back pocket. He thinks he has the courts in his back pockets. We don't know at this point. So he literally is tyranny forward at this point, and that's what we're proceeding to. He really has all of the makings of a true dictator.